Alright, what's going on everyone? Started in Vue 3.4, we received a new macro called defineModel to simplify two-way binding. This was released actually as an experimental feature back in version 3.3, but became stable part of version 3.4. This macro provides a more straightforward approach to two-way binding on components compared to options we had prior to version 3.4. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this macro works. First, let's take a look at a common example of how this would have looked prior to this macro, as I think it's always good to have an understanding of how things work under the hood. So here in what we can call a parent component, which is going to be our home view, we have a form input component which has a vModel directive hooked up to a ref called value. Now under the hood, the vModel directive is doing two things. It binds a prop called model value to the value that we have declared here in the parent, which we called value. It also listens for an emitted event called update::model value, and it takes the new value and updates our ref to that new value. Now inside of our form input component, to achieve two-way binding, we had to do a few things. First, we needed to declare a prop called model value and also a emitted event called update::model value. And on the input that we wanted to sync this up to, we needed to bind the value of the input to our model value prop. And we also had to listen for the input event and emit that update::model value event with the new value that the user typed in. Now, if you use Vue for a while like I have, this was something that I think we all just gotten used to, but as you can probably see, it's quite verbose just to set something up as simple as two-way binding. And this is where the new defineModel macro comes in to simplify things. So using the same example, let's just replace it with the defineModel macro. Now instead of having to define a prop and a corresponding emit, we can just create a new variable and we'll call this model, and then we'll set it equal to the defineModel macro. And under the hood, a few things happen. First, the variable that we created called model becomes a local ref and actually gets synced up to the prop called model value. And this local ref that we created can also be updated within this component. Second, an event called update::model value is created and emitted back to the parent whenever this local ref is mutated. Now, since this local ref that we have called model can be updated within this component, we're actually able to use the vModel directive here on this input within the component to achieve two-way binding. And if we take a look inside of the application, as we type into the input, you can see the ref, which is also being outputted within our parent, is also being updated. So as you can see, instead of having to define all this logic like we used to, the defineModel macro takes care of all this logic under the hood, and it allows us to achieve two-way binding with only a single line. Now, if you have arguments on your vModel, the defineModel macro makes it super easy to handle. So for example, on this component, we can add the argument of first name to the vModel. And also for consistency, let's also update the name of our ref here inside of our parent to first name as well. Then inside of our component, let's update the variable name here as well to first name, and then we can pass the argument first name as a string for the first parameter of the macro. Now, since this macro does declare a prop, if you wanted to make your prop required or set a default value, you can also pass an object as a parameter and set a required property to true or a default value. Now, just be careful when setting a default value within here, as it may cause some desynchronization issues between the parent and the child component. So for example, if we set a default value in our child component and not the parent, you'll see by default the input has the default value, but inside of the parent component where we're outputting the first name ref, we don't have anything. However, as soon as you type into the input, that will get synced back up. So my recommendation is, although you can set a default value here, I would opt to set that default value on the parent itself and not within the child component. So since we learned that we can leverage arguments on vModels using this macro, you also have the ability to define multiple vModels on one component. For example, let's create another ref called last name here inside of our parent component, and then create a corresponding vModel directive with the argument of last name. And within the child component, we'll create another variable called last name, and we'll set this equal to the defineModel macro with the value of the argument last name. And as you're able to see, you have the ability to define multiple vModels using this macro for a simple way to achieve two-way binding. Alright, so that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you found it helpful and can start implementing this macro into your projects for simpler two-way binding. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like on it down below and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.